Welcome to the Tzurba M'Rabanan Hilchot Shabbat Program with Rabbi Shalom Rosner. Tzurba is a revolutionary halacha sefer which guides you through over 300 topics in Jewish law in a unique signature style. In this weekly series specifically, Rabbi Shalom Rosner learns through the Tzurba Hilchot Shabbat volumes, helping us all master the Halachot of Shabbat in just 2 years. Tzurba volumes are available for purchase worldwide on Amazon. And to learn more about Tzurba, or for those in Eretz Yisrael looking to purchase volumes, please head over to tzurbaolami.com. For more information, see the description below. And now, Rabbi
Okay, here we go into the next Shiur. It is Shiur in this volume, in volume number 21 of the Tzurba M'Rabanan, the Lax family edition of volumes, and the Mervis family volume. We are up to Shiur number 6, which is the halachas of medicines and Shabbos and Cholim. These are the last two Shiurim in this volume. Very halacha l'maisa, very important Shiurim. We will be starting. It's these shiurim are dedicated in memory of Dr. Robin Goldman, Zechron Levracha, and we will be starting on page 275. Right, these are shiurim, as we'll see, that maybe are the most important shiurim that we have had in all of these Hilchos Shabbos shiurim. The Gemara tells us that, interesting, the Gemara is not in Masechah Shabbos. Gemara is Maseches Yuma. You would think that for sure this Gemara belongs in Maseches Shabbos. It's about Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbos, but it's not. It shows you that we have to learn all of Torah and all of Shas in order to know, the halacha, all the halachas which are interrelated. The Gemara in Yuma, Daf Pehei, Daf Peyam and Al, Peyam and Beis. Source number 1 on page 275 discusses what is the source for Pikuach Nefesh being Docha Shabbos. How do you know that Shabbos is not one of the big three? So again, we know there are sources. The Gemara maybe didn't even have to ask this, because the Gemara doesn't say, how do you know that Pikuach Nefesh is Docha, Tarfus, and Shatnez, and all the other Averas? There's no specific source. It says V'chai Bahem, so I guess that's the inclusive source, as the Gemara is going to say here. But really, you can start from the opposite. There's only 3 Averas where there's a specific source or svara that you have to give your life, Yehareg Vayavar, which is mashba that all other mitzvahs you don't give your life. But the Gemara finds a separate mitzvah, separate source here. So the Gemara says in Yuma Daf Pehei, source number 1. V'kvar hayir Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Malchun Baderech. These 3 great Tanoim were walking on the way. V'Levi Hasador, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Malchun Achareihem. And these 2 other rabbis were walking behind them. Nishala Shelozu B'fneihem. And they asked this following shaila: Minayin l'pikuach nefesh dochas Shabbos. How do we know that pikuach nefesh is dochas Shabbos? So the Gemara has a whole list of sources, and in front of you have the last 2. The last 2, which are the ones that are quoted lahalacha. Rav Shimon ben Asya Omer v'shamru b'nei Yisrael as Shabbos. Amr Torah chalel lav Shabbos achas kedei sheyishmar Shabbosos harbei. Keep Shabbos. What does that mean? Chalel, violate today so that you can keep future Shabbosos. Chalel Shabbos achas kedei sheyishmar Shabbosos harbei. And that's svara, even though the Gemara here in Yuma does not seem to say that it holds up Lamaskana, but we do quote that Lamaskana. As we'll see, the Ramban says that you quote, let's just see the next source, and then we'll say the Ramban. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Shmuel has another short. Iavi Hasam, Hava Mina Didia Difa Mida 2. Rav Shmuel says, he has the best source. What's his source? V'chai Bahem. You shall live in the mitzvahs and not die in the mitzvahs, and therefore you shall live. Pikuach nefesh is docha Shabbos. And Rava says, L'kulu es l'pircha. The Gemara goes through a problem with each of the other 5 or 6 sources that are quoted, except for Shmuel's doesn't have a pircha. Barmi there's this l'pircha, so that's the makar for Pikuach nefesh being docha Shabbos. If one's life is in danger, then we violate Shabbos. V'chai bohem v'lo yamas bohem. And the Gemara even quotes an afkamina between Shmuel's halacha and all the other halachas. V'kulu, the top of page 276. V'kulu ashkechan vadai. And all the other sources just quote that if there is a vadai danger, that's when you're allowed to be docha. Safek, minalan. How do you know safek is also, you violate for safek? Says the Gemara, Shmuel vadai les lahu pircha. How do you know the safek minalan? Shmuel's is even a makar that is mishum safek. Even Mishum Safik Pikuach Nefesh is also Docha. Even the other sources seem to say only Vade is Docha. Even Safik is Docha. Shmuel Vade Leslu Pircha. Shmuel doesn't have a kasha. So one nafkamina that's brought in the Gemara is Safik and Vade. The Ramban, as I mentioned before, has another one. Maybe we'll see this later as well. What about for a fetus? What if theoretically, usually it doesn't come up, theoretically, I mean, often if the mother's life is in danger, the baby's life is in danger, if you have a pregnant woman, they go together. But let's say theoretically you can come up with a case where a woman's life is not in danger, but only a fetus's life is in danger. And what if it's a fetus even before 40 days? Somehow a woman knows that she's pregnant after 2 weeks. Are you allowed to be Machal Shabbos for that fetus, that tiny little nothing, Maya Ba'alma, before 40 days? The Ramban says yes. Why? There's no chiyus yet, there's no life yet. Why? Because of Chalal Shabbos Achas, Shishmer Shabbos Harbe. Because of the second to last source in the Gemara. Because of this baby could be Mekayim Shabbos in the future. So you see the Ramban in Torah Ha'adam, that's a sefer on Avelus and Bikur Cholim and Choli on Shabbos. So that's what the Ramban says, uses that svar of Chalal Shabbos Achas. This is the halacha. We're Machal Shabbos even for Safek Pikuach Nefesh. Says the Gemara there in Yuma Daf Pedalit, source number 2, Tana Rabbanon, Mifachin Pikuach Nefesh B'Shabbos, V'Hazariz Harezeh Meshubach. Please, Mifachin, you take care of it, of Pikuach Nefesh. And if somebody does it quickly, they are praiseworthy. Vein Tzarach Lito Rishus Bezdin. Don't ask Rishus from Bezdin. Don't ask Rishus. The Yerushalmi even goes further and says, the Yerushalmi in Yuma, Hazariz HaMeshubach, V'Hanishal Megune. The one who is asked is disgraceful. What does that mean? The rabbi who's asked the question is disgraceful. The one who asks is like a murderer. What does that mean? So explain the Mefarshim on the Yerushalmi. Nishal, what does that mean? It means that if a rabbi has to be asked about Pikuach Nefesh, it means he hadn't given a shiur about that yet. And they weren't sure whether you're Docha Shabbos or Pikuach Nefesh. So that's the problem. That's Megune. Every rabbi has to get up before the situation comes up and says, Mechal Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. The Mishnah Berurah explains that in Shin Chav Ches. Shin Chav Ches is the siman about refuah. In the Shulchan Aruch says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirish, explaining this Yerushalmi in source number 4. Oso ha'ishu mischaseid, that person who pretends to be pious, v'yarei l'chal Shabbos, b'chol kazeh, and is scared to be Mechal Shabbos. Ki imay de more, hariu shofech tam. I'm not going to be Mechal Shabbos unless I get a psak based on it. If it's clearly Sheba'ochu holich l'shol yechlash achol yosef yuchlas takin, you're going to go ask. So then it could be that the chol is going to get sicker. Vari akasav omer lo samad adam reyecha. And he quotes the Yerushalmi Nishal Pirish. The Talmud Chacham should be darshaning in his shul. So nobody even has to ask. You know that's the halacha of Pikuach Nefesh. So that is the Yisod. The Yisod is Pikuach Nefesh is Docha Shabbos. Even Safek Pikuach Nefesh is Docha Shabbos. I saw, it doesn't quote here, I saw recently a beautiful Maharal in the Gur Aryeh at the end of Parsha Shlach, where the Maharal says that if you're looking the Torah, until he's medayik based on the fact that it says the Mekoshesh violated B'Yom HaShabbos. So Rashi says, it was the second Shabbos and he already violated. So they asked the Maharal, what? Maybe it was the first Shabbos. How does Rashi know it's the second Shabbos? So the Maharal says because it's called Shabbos in the Torah. And Shabbos is not called Shabbos until the Jews keep Shabbos. So once they had one Shabbos that they kept, so the second Shabbos could be called Shabbos. If it was the first Shabbos, it wouldn't be called Shabbos yet, because it's not Shabbos yet. And he's medayik. Look at all the times it talks about Shabbos. It's Yom HaShvi. Look at Vayechulu. It's not called Shabbos. Right? Vayevarach Elokim is Yom HaShvi. Right? Vayechulu It's all Yom HaShvi. It's not Shabbos until the Jew keeps Shabbos. Shows you the connection between the two, and therefore that's why you don't give your life for Shabbos, because there's no Shabbos without the Jew. Continuing, the Mishnah Berurah continues in that same piece and says, what happens if the patient doesn't want to be Mechal Shabbos? No, it's Shabbos. You force him. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'machola ba'atzmo misyari sheyavro olav as Shabbos." Kofano, so you force him. Umedaber malibo shu chasida shel shus. That's a chassid shota. No, Hashem wants you to be mechalel Shabbos. The Gemara even says, what happens if somebody was mechalel Shabbos for a chola and he didn't need it in the end? Does he have to bring a chatas? Was that a shogeg? The answer is no. He did a mitzvah. Says the Gemara Menachas Samach Dalet. Amar Rabbah, source number 6. Chola shamdu l'grogres achas. There was a chola that needed one fig to be able to save his life. V'ratzu asar b'nei adam. 10 people ran and each brought a fig. Right? 10 Atzala guys come to the same place. Ve'viu asar grogres b'basa achas beturin. They're all pater because they all brought it. They all brought the figs and they all thought they were saving this person's life. Even if they brought it one after another, they didn't know. They didn't know that it wasn't needed. Even if it was ready healthy by the time the later person came, when he did it, he was doing it l'shem, saving a life. and therefore there is no problem. And the Shulchan Aruch adds in Shin Chavches, Dua Rofim Shetzorach Grogris Achas V'Ratzu Asara Vevi Lo Kal Achas Grogris. The language of the Gemara was just Petur in their Pater. The Shulchan Aruch goes farther. Kulam Peturim V'Yesh Lahem Schar Tov Me'es Hashem, and they all have tremendous schar. Afilu Hivri Barishona, even if the person got healed by the first one. Fine. So that is background step number one. Pikuach nefesh is docha. How do you determine what's pikuach nefesh? How do you determine if somebody's life is in danger? So the Mishnah says in Yuma, in the 8th parak, that's where all these halachas are. Misha Nafala Mapola, source number 8 on page 278. Misha Nafala Mapola, somebody is under a building, Rachman al-San, that collapsed. Safik Usham, Safik Enusham. You're not sure if he's there or not even. You don't know where he is. Safik Chai, Safik Meis, and even if he's there, you're not sure if he's alive or dead. Maybe he's dead already. Safik Nachri, Safik Yisrael. We'll talk more about that next week. By the Hashem, Mefach and Alavas Agal. If there's any type of Safik, you are Mefakech Hazagal. You violate Shabbos. These are malachas, getting construction vehicles and bulldozers. Matzu Chai Mefachin. If you find him alive, pull him out. Keep going. If you only know there's only one person on there, and you finally get to him and he's dead, so then you have to leave him because he's muksa. The dead body, we discussed muksa a little bit. A dead body is muksa, and you could do anything for it, do things for it, but moving it, once you see that he's dead, so then there is no reason to continue to be machalal. What is there if there's a machlokas between different people about whether this is a case of chilul? The Gemara in Yuma says, the doctor says, you don't have to be machal Shabbos. But the patient says, I'm sick, I have to have this. Shoman l'chola, listen to the chola. The chola overrides. My taima, Levi Yodea Maras Nafsho. Levi, his heart knows. There is a story in the Rishonim that the Riva didn't eat on Yom Kippur when the doctor said if he doesn't eat, then he's for sure going to die. If he eats, there's a chance that he might live. That was the story, and the Riva didn't eat, and he died. So the Radvaz in Tshuva was asked by others, what are we supposed to do with this answer to this Riva? So he says, it's for sure not halacha l'maisa, and it's not normative, and if the doctors say you have to listen to the doctors. It could be the Riva knew that even if he would eat, he would die anyway. And he quotes this pasuk of Levi Yodei Amaras Nafsho, L'chara is based on this Gemara. But this Gemara says that the doctor, the machlokes between the doctor and the patient, you listen to the patient. Pshita, ma'odetema rofi kim leitvei kamash balan. You might have said that a doctor knows more. Doctor knows better. So the doctor says he's not bikuach nefesh. You're not machala. Kamash balan. You listen to the patient. What about the opposite? Rofe omer tzarech v'chol omer enot tzarech shomen l'rofe. Again, we're machmir in bikuach nefesh. You listen to the doctor. My taima tunva hu denaket la, because tunva, some type of confusion, and he's the patient's out of it. Maybe he feels a little better than he really is. Doesn't feel the pain. So that's why whenever there's a machlokes between the patient and the doctor, we're machmir to be mechal Shabbos to save the life. Similarly, what if there's a machlokes between doctors? So this is regarding eating on Yom Kippur, but it's the same yisod about being mechal Shabbos. Says the Gemara there, source number 10 now. Machilin also al pibakian. Pshita safik nefashos safik nefashos lahakel. Right, you feed him based on the doctors, of course. Right, that you do that. What's the chiddush? Lo tzricha diika trei achrini bahadei. Da'armi lo tzarach. What if there's one doctor that says he has to eat, and two doctors that say he doesn't have to eat on Yom Kippur? V'yafa gav damar of safar trei kameya. And even though by edus 2 equals 100, 100 equals 2, hanimilinian edus avalinian umdina basar deos aslinan. But here, even if the deos are against, it still creates a situation of safek nefashos, and therefore one would be machal Shabbos in that case. The Shulchan Aruch quotes that even if a person is not a doctor, what if there's a person that's a non-doctor? Kol chol isha rofim shin chavches yud in the Shulchan Aruch, source number 11. Kol chol isha rofim omrim shu sakana. If the doctors say there's a sakana, afal pishu ala basar mivachutz, even though it's an external wound. But if the doctors say it's a siman of something, mechalon of the Shabbos. V'im rofi echad omer tzarech, rofi echad omer eno tzarech. Machlokas 1 and 1. The doctors machalin, as we said. V'yesh misha omer she'ein tzarech mumche. Even if it's not an expert. To call b'nei adam chashuvin mumchin ksas. V'savin v'vashel lahakel. What an amazing line. All people are considered a little mumche. Mumche, everybody has some type of a life wisdom. V'safik nefashos lahakel. The Ramah says maybe it's better to trust Jews, but not non-Jews. Not that non-Jews wouldn't lie, but sometimes non-Jews might be extra super cautious. super cautious. Right, so therefore that could be something that happens on Yom Kippur as well. If the doctor just, it's always safe to say every pregnant woman should eat. But by the Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, it's every case is going to be has to be analyzed. Okay, but this is the discussion. The Ramah's halacha about not relying on a guy regarding a doctor doesn't say that it's usher to rely on a guy. Just it sounds like you may rely, but Tiferet Yisrael says that in those days, as I just said, Tiferet Yisrael in his commentary on that Mishnah in Yuma, in source number 13, one of the classic commentaries on Mishnayos, end of the 1700s. Afilu rofe akum im omer shekshiyis ane efshar shiyis takein. Right, even if a non-Jewish doctor says, right, if the woman fasts, it's dangerous, machilin also, right, or it's not a woman, a man, you give him food. So the kol choli kal omrim tamish kisani yistakin. They always say, oh, if you don't eat, it's going to be dangerous. So you have to take every case separately. Every case separately, you have to figure out. That's what the Mishnah, the Bir Halacha says. Again, in Hilchos Yom Kippur. So, it's subject to the judgments of every posek. Rav Zilberstein quotes his father-in-law, Rav Yashiv, that although it's preferable to have a Shomer Shabbos doctor, because then he has the medicine and he has the halacha, but whoever's available, you have to listen to that doctor. Says the Torah Seyoledes, source number 14. That's the Rav Zilberstein Sefer. Vishamano me'agon Rav Yashiv Shalita, or Zatzal, Shem Rofe HaChashid Laver Al Divrei Torah Omer Sheishchash Sakana. If a doctor that doesn't keep mitzvahs says there's a sakana, Chayavim Lishmolo, you still have to listen to him. This is a Safi B'Goch Nefesh. Kolzman She'ein Misha Yachlok Al Advarav, as long as nobody argues with him. Me'acher V'Dvarav Osim Lo Al Kol Panim Safek. Creates a Safek. Varigam Safi B'Goch Nefesh Docha Yom Kippur. V'Divrei Bir Halacha Nemru L'Inyan Shel Lechatchila Yesh Liz Yaitz Im Rofe Shomer Torah. But if you don't have one, then you know that this person is expert, even if he's not Shomer Torah mitzvos, then you listen to that. There is another important point of the Bir Halacha that says that we said before, if it's a patient versus a doctor, you could trust the patient to be mechalel, but it has to be within the reason. If somebody smashes their toe and says, "I'm dying, I have to go to the hospital," we have to try to calm them down. Right, one has to be within reason. The Bir Halacha again in Shin Chav Ches, that's it. Lanias Daiti. Einat Ramamurim, source 15. Elak Sha'omer Margish Ani Chulsha Be'ever Ploni. I feel a weakness in this aver. Alkein Yasu Li Trufa Ploni Shemuelas L'Choli Aver Zeh. Ubezev Adi Shomenlo. Right, I need this medicine. I feel this medicine. V'chula. I feel Rofi Amar Shein Sorach Shom Trufa. Avalim Amachlo Yedua. If there's an illness and this is the medicine and he wants the other medicine, he has a bruise. In that case, he says, "Machla Yedua, v'achola omer sha'trufa zu mo'elas l'machla zo, v'arofi omer she'ena mo'al baze, ain't svarol l'shmo." You don't listen to the chola, who's not an expert, who might not be thinking properly, as we said before. Tunva, he might not be thinking properly. The Radvaz says, again, similarly, Mo de'ani shemachacham arofe omer sha'trufa sheshol yazikehu shoman l'rofe afilu b'chol. Right, doctors have a certain expertise, and we trust them, especially in Pikuach Nefesh, in these cases. Rav Shlomo Zalman find in this last section discusses. So how do you determine what if it's unclear? What if a person after the chalent is having some heart issues, and you're not sure if it's heartburn or a heart attack? Right, that's different than stubbing the toe. Shlomo Zalman says if most people would be worried and concerned about this, you could consider that Pikuach Nefesh. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman in the Mincha Shlomo in source number 17. Here we are on page 282. The Posek Hador in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Moshe in America, and Rav Shlomo Zalman in Eretz Yisrael. Vad Eifo Hu Agvol, among others. Vad Eifo Hu Agvol, Gam Anochi Bani Yistapakti Tuva Bazeh. I'm not 100% sure. How do you define? When do you know? What I think might be misvara. If it's the way of people to run away from this. If most people run away from this, like they run away from sakana. If most people would drive, most people would be nervous about this, that's already savi b'kuach nefesh. If most people wouldn't be nervous about this, I don't know. It's a lightning storm, thunderstorm. And you have to go into you're in a house. Right? Most people wouldn't think that's pikuach nefesh, to be in the house, right? To drive somewhere else to be better sheltered. So one has to use their svara, and he quotes also, he says that there's some type of vaccination that has to happen. So if you don't need to get it today, you can get it tomorrow, you can get it next week, then you can't do it on Shabbos if there's some type of chilul involved. But if you don't get it now, you won't be able to get it for the next 3 years, and then it'll be dangerous. So then you would be able to be mechalal. So either way, this is Shlomo Zalman wanted to use their head in determining pikuach nefesh. Other examples of cases of pikuach nefesh. Internal wounds. You have it there now on page 283. Chazal specified certain situations, and we'll get to people, a woman who just had a baby, as we'll get to, certain situations which are pikuach nefesh without having to go ask a doctor. They're defined halachically as pikuach nefesh. The Gemara Avodah Zarah, there's a lot there on Daf Chavches regarding this issue. The Gemara Avodah Zarah says any internal wound is called dangerous. And as is the wound on the back of a hand or on top of a foot or a very high fever, the Gemara says. The Gemara wonders, what's internal? What about in the gums and the teeth? Is that internal? Amar Vad Masa Amarav, says the Gemara. Chavches. Gava, yad v'gava regal, arin k'maka shochalol. Maka shochalol, chalol is internal wounds. So the Gemara says, wounds, like cut open skin on the back of hands and feet, so the Gemara assumed that was, and you go by the science of the times, that's called like an internal wound. If you have a very high fever, we'll get to what that means. And you're mechal Shabbos for somebody with a high fever. What's the border of internal wound? Pirush Rabbi Ami menasafa v'lifnim. From the lips on in, meaning gums and teeth are called internal. Boy Rabbi Eliezer, kachi v'shini mai. Really? What about the teeth and the gums? Kiva da akushi ninu kemaka debraidamu. Do we say that since they are firm and they're not internal and they're right there, you should say that they are considered out external? Odilma kiva da gavai kaimi, they're inside the mouth. Kemaka shochalodami. What do you say? And the Gemara does not prove either way. The Rosh says savi bikuach nefesh, and therefore one would be machmir to be mechalel, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Shulchan Aruch says in 19, Komaka shochalol dainu shemei shinayim v'lifnim v'shinayim atzman bechlal mechalel alav es ha-Shabbos. What's an internal wound? Right, the Ran quotes Rabbeinu Yonah. It's an internal wound, not an internal ache. Because of a Rashba, b'shem Rabbeinu Yonah, da darmina makon shachalo machalin dafka b'shenis kalkel echem enivar pnimiyim, where there is a wound where it's fallen apart in the organ. Machmas hamaka obu v'chayotze bazeh. Aval mechushin, but if somebody has an ache, which we'll get to more mechush when we talk about medicines in the next year, mechushin ein nekran makav ein machalin of the Shabbos. If it's just an ache, you're not machal Shabbos for an ache, unless it's such a bad ache. The Bir Halacha says if it's such a bad pain that might reflect that there's a wound there, even if you didn't know there was a wound. Somebody has appendicitis, so then you didn't know it's an ache, but it's a reflection of something much deeper, something much worse, right? That's what the Mishnah Berurah says in the Bir Halacha in source 21. Daf Kashin is kalkel, right? Quoting that from the Rashba in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah. If you know for sure that there's no wound, it's just a pain, that's not called Maka Shalchalo. Calls Manchalon is Kalkal Echan Mevar Mapinimium. Ulam Bir Agra, Tzarachian, Mikal Makom. Says the Bir Halacha. Efshar Lomar. Dim Kav Le Tuva, Be'echan Mevar Mapinimium, if it's a very deep pain. Maybe something got ruined. Maybe there's a wound there. And there's nobody to ask. Machal Shabbos. Safek. If it's such a deep pain, you're Machal Shabbos for that. Again, even a Daraisa. Even a Daraisa in these cases, because this is Maka Shel Chalol, it's a potential Maka Shel Chalol. The Ramban says in Torah Sa'adam, as we quoted before, that if you know it could wait, then you wait. Right, like every case, the Bikuach Nefesh case, you know it can wait, then you should wait. If somebody breaks a certain type of limb and it's close to the end of Shabbos, and you know waiting a half an hour is not going to make a difference, then you wait. If every minute counts, then you don't wait. But the Torah Sa'adam says that in source 22, the Ramban says again, internal organs are always Bikuach Nefesh, but aval. You have to wait. You have to wait. Again, if you know for sure, it's not a blanket heter that you know for sure. If you know vadai that waiting for 5 minutes is not going to make a difference, waiting for 2 hours, so then you wait. If there's a chash that it could become worse, then you go. Then you go. If you look in the Halachos of Refuah of Rabbi Banner, he confirms this. An injury or an acute, sudden, or chronic illness which affects an internal organ, such as the heart, kidney, liver, lungs, prostate, stomach, is automatically considered to be a life-threatening illness, unless we definitely know otherwise. Often, a severe acute pain emanating from the internal cavity is a sign that an organ on the inside of the cavity is critically ill, and you didn't know, but you got to get to a hospital. If one is suffering from a chronic long-term internal organ disorder, heart disorder, blood pressure, kidney disorder, v'chulu, his doctor will often have prescribed medicine to care or control the illness, and of course you take that on Shabbos. One should confer with his doctor to determine the Shabbos ramifications of each of his medicines. So there is a heter of makos shel cholol, but one has to know that it's only if it reflects the pikuach nefesh case. What about wounds of, like a metal implement or any other type of implement? So the Gemara Avodah Zarah there, Daf Chav Ches, it's all the same daf. Shmuel, as my father always loved to quote him, Shmuel, the most famous Talmudic doctor, who was busy taking care of people, that's why he didn't get smicha, not Rav Shmuel. Shmuel, hai padasa sakanta. This gash that's caused by a sword is a danger to life. U'mechalan alav esha Shabbos. That's the Shulchan Aruch. In 25, Machalan al Shabbos al kol makkah shenachazas machmas barzel. Any type of makkah, any type of wound, any type of open wound. And again, you go by the science of the times. You have an open wound, it might get infected, you have to get it closed up. So that for sure is pikuach nefesh. The Shmir Shabbos says, you have to know. The Shmir Shabbos says that b'mikrim haba mishlinok bechola kedei chola sheish bo sakana. If it's a deep wound, gam kodem shnikva davar dei rofe. You're not sure, but it's deep. Petza amok or chatach amok shenigram adei sakin or klei barzel, a knife. Maka chazaka mi barzel o mechefetz kavei kamo evan, a stone. Anything that could have damaged something inside, or there's an open gash. One has to take care of that on Shabbos. What about the other item mentioned in the Gemara there, and that is fever? Ishta, how high of fever? So Ramosha has a case, and again, you take Moshe Kipshuto, it seems Sarachian, but he must be talking about specific cases where you don't know what it means. Ramosha in Orach Chaim Aleph Kuf Chavtes talks about fever of 102 Fahrenheit. Fever of 102 is already very dangerous Chilul Shabbos, which others worry about. There are plenty of people that have, not plenty of people, but there are sick people in bed have 102 fever, and you're not Machal Shabbos for them. You don't drive for them. Again, maybe you could take medicine, maybe you could ask a guy to do a malacha. But is that pikuach nefesh? Ramosha has that. But dvar kadachas cham beyoser, a high fever, 27. Shemachal navsa Shabbos, Yemachal Shabbos. Kama midas achom. Says Ramosha. Hine, ein bazeh davar barer, there's nothing clear. Avalein tzorach sheyiyeh barer shu sakana. It doesn't have to be in the world of vadai, 105. It doesn't have to be vadai like that. Dal savinami mechalin. When are you already into the suffix sakana? The kol shadam choshesh lazeh shemu cham beyoser mechalin. V'rak mashatovishu rak ma'atchum barer ein mechalin. Only if you know for sure that it's only a little fever, so then you're not mechalal. But anything that's already a suffix, Ramosha goes out here on a limb. What is it? 102. Vistam b'nei adam choshen shekuzhukarv l'midas mea v'shnayim shucham biyoser al midazu machalin ve'irashoyin lahachmer. You're not allowed to be machmir. That's chassid shota. V'echad choshesh gam b'karv l'mea v'echad v'ros shechalav zeh machalin. And if somebody is very nervous at 101 also, one can. That's no worse than in any other external where the patient says, I think my life is in danger, you're allowed to listen. But again, Ramosha says, if it's coming from an internal organ, if it reflects, if the fever, even if it's less, but if the fever reflects some type of infection in any other internal organ, you don't know what the organ is, you're Mechal Shabbos for that, even less than that. Right? Onir L'nei's Daiti says Ramosha Barer. Shemachom ba mi machlas shebria o mi machlas share varim panimium hu maka shachalal. If the fever is coming, you have a slight fever. Sometimes people in the hospital have a slight fever that reflects something. Oh, what's going on? You need to test them in your Mechal Shabbos, even for a small fever. V'chol anidom b'kadachas hu kitzinom ba'alma shlo ba me'ver miyuchad v'chulu. The Tzitz Eliezer said, he spoke to numerous doctors, and to say that 102 is an automatic chol l'sheish bo sakana b'Mechal Shabbos, so he did not find that acceptable. To say 102 is enough. If you say 102, then 101, and there's ein lo davar sof. Umadi Yisham Shezeo Afilu Kishachom Ba Mitzinon Da Alma Shlo Ba Mever Miyuchad. If Nabal Hadu Achal Shabbos B'chol Kagon Da. There's no ends. So what is it? So it says Eliezer Rav Rosner says 104. 104. Bakadachas Gavoa Tua Shemagia Diosam Me'arboim Malos 40. Vadai Sakana Gedola. Right? So that's modern medicine has enabled us to determine more effectively what the fever is coming from. So you have to know every situation is different, but any type of suffix, especially in a person who is very vulnerable, so then for sure one is Machal Shabbos. The Shmir Shabbos quotes 14 cases in the next source number 30, that the person is treated as a chola sheyesh bo sakana. Chom gava beofen nikar im hargasha ra'a. Right, very, very high fever, and you don't know what the reason for the high fever is. Chom afilu lo gavo eitzel tinokas v'zakenim. Child or elderly, even if it's not as high. V'cheinu novei mimachla brius o be'aver pnimi. You know where it's coming from, some other type of aver. Ke'ev pnimi chazak. What if you have a very strong internal pain and you don't know where it's coming from? You think that it could be a very serious illness. Petza omok, ochetach amok, a very deep wound. Shenigramadei sakin okli barzel, from a knife or if a stone, right? Any type of possibility of infection, right? You continue on the next page. We didn't even quote them all here. Makas chom, makas shemesh, some type of heat stroke. Akitza shel tzira, you get a bite. Get a bite of a dog, a snake, a scorpion, other types of bites. Hara'ala, poison, all of these. All of these are pikuach nefesh, ibud akara, halam chachash. You have a loss of consciousness, shock, suspected shock from somebody, a concussion, somebody falling on their head. Any case that's sabei pikuach nefesh, mechala Shabbos. So that is point number 1. And point number 2, that you're how do you determine pikuach nefesh? This is the first part of the shiur that we'll have. Next time we'll talk about for whom do we violate Shabbos? What about the life of a non-Jew? What are you allowed to do to save a life? So, B'ez Hashem, we'll get to that in the coming shiurim. We will stop here.